So we made a video a bit ago where we VOD reviewed one of the users on skillcap.com and talked about the different errors in the way that they peeked angles. This sort of brought up the point though that there are different types of peeks in Valorant that are very situational. The game is a lot more than just clicking heads, and there's a lot of psychology that goes into why you would want to peek something one way versus another. Today what we're going to do is go over every single different type of peek that I could think of and talk about why and where you would want to use these different types of peeks. We're going to start out with one of the more common peeks and go into the more advanced stuff, so just stick with me. Starting out with the wide swing, this is probably the most common type of peek because it psychologically just probably makes the most sense. You want to swing around a corner and you're looking for a fight, so you swing wide and scan for the enemy as you do this. However, in many situations, wide swinging can actually be pretty bad, and here's why. If you're wide swinging with zero information of what is on the other side, you're oftentimes putting yourself in a very dangerous scenario. This is because the enemies know where you're going to come from, but you actually have no idea where the enemies are. Performing a wide swing with zero information and using zero utility is what we call a dry peek, and it is generally a pretty bad idea. You could be swinging into an operator, maybe an enemy is playing an off angle that would be difficult to flick to, maybe there are 3 enemies on the other side, you don't know, and that's kind of the problem. This is why if you're wide swinging an angle, it's important that you have some sort of idea of what to expect on the other side. Other things to note with wide swings is that the closer to the wall that you are, the faster your wide swing is generally going to be. This is why it's important to try and close that gap against operator users, because it's going to be a lot easier for them to land this shot versus landing this shot. Moving on to something similar to a wide swing, and this is what people call a Ferrari peek. I've heard this term used a lot. I'm not quite sure if this is common terminology, but this is basically when somebody takes a wide swing to the extreme. They wide swing and then they keep running. This can be really strong because players will expect you to stop and they will try to flick towards your head, but instead of stopping, you will keep going and make it very hard for them to land their shot. This is especially strong when abusing run and gun on weapons like the Frenzy, the Spectre, or the Judge. Even in close ranges, you'll see players will abuse this with the Phantom or the Vandal, and it's quite a laughable peek, but it's also something that absolutely works and you should include in your arsenal. Definitely not the most precise way to take down your opponents, but it still does a good job at times. Moving over towards the short peek though, and this peek is basically what you use when you refer to the slice the pie method that we talked about previously in our videos. You'll generally use this peek when you're unsure of where the enemy is, but you aren't able to use utility to clear them out. You'll slowly clear each individual off angle until you're able to locate the enemy and land your shot. Generally, you'll want to perform this peek from as far away from the wall as possible. As we mentioned, this is a slow clear. If you try to perform this from too close to the wall, you'll just end up getting yourself killed due to angle advantage. Moving on to more of an info related peek though, let's talk about jiggle peeking and jump peeking next. Jiggle peeking is often also referred to as shoulder peeking, and this is generally something that you'll use to gain info or to bait out a shot from your enemies. Sometimes it can even be used to get your enemy's attention.
Hey, look at me!
When doing jiggle peeking correctly, you shouldn't really be able to see anything on the other side of the wall. This peek is most often performed with your knife out and standing close to the wall so that you can peek as fast as possible. You will just barely show your shoulder, and oftentimes this is enough to bait out an operator shot. Once they've taken their shot, you can now pick up the angle for yourself so that if they re-peek, you'll have the advantage. You can also use this opportunity to move to a location that isn't exactly on the angle to give yourself an even greater advantage. When performing this peek versus somebody who isn't using an operator though, it can also be useful to mess with their recoil or their crosshair placement. Oftentimes players will try to spray at the corner or pre-fire you when they see this peek, and you can use this as an opportunity to combine it with a wide swing and pick up your well-deserved kill. Now, you might think, if you can't see a player, what do I do if they don't shoot at me? Well, in this case, you're specifically looking for info, and rather than going wider and getting yourself killed, a much safer peek that you can pull off is called a jump peek. Jump peeking is great for gathering info because it makes it a lot more difficult for you to get headshot. When peeking wide, you could still really run the risk of getting yourself headshot, but with a jump peek, it's very unlikely to get punished too hard for this when done right. The most that you'll normally expect is a body shot. To perform a jump peek, approach the angle and jump forward, and then immediately hold the S and A key or S and D key depending on where you're peeking from. This is one way to perform it. The other way is just to swipe your mouse across the screen to air strafe out of view. Both of these work fine. I personally feel like the air strafe is a little bit better, but it's really your call. I'm an immortal level player and I've never been killed while doing this jump peek, so I mean, it's really just preference, I feel like. I generally will jump peek on agents who don't have a lot of info gathering abilities and when I'm not intending to take a fight. You're just looking for the info with this peek. For lower rank players, oftentimes it's going to be difficult for you to know exactly when you want to use this type of peek, but I recommend using it when the game is quiet. Too quiet. Moving on to crouch peeking, this is something that you can do if you think somebody is holding your angle and you want to throw off their crosshair placement. Most players will aim at head level, at least in the higher ranks, so by crouch peeking around a corner, you can really throw them off for a bit. Now, with this being said, it's not exactly the type of peek that many of you probably think this is. You shouldn't just be crouching when you peek the angle. That's just a good way to get yourself killed. Instead, what you'll want to do is crouch into the angle. This way, you can still get the full benefit of moving quickly while also getting the benefit of making it more difficult for you to get headshot. This will take some practice, but once you get it down, it will look something like this. As we mentioned earlier, this peek can be pretty good versus better players, but if you're in the lower ranks, I don't recommend using this peek too often, as the players that you're playing against likely have worse crosshair placement, and you might just crouch into your death. Now, let's actually backtrack a little bit. Remember when we talked about dry peeking and how it can be bad? Similar to everything else in the game, dry peeking isn't always bad. In many situations, it can actually be pretty good. Specifically, it can be good if the enemies don't know your location and you think you might get the jump on them. Using utility would just announce your location and actually hurt your peek. Instead, you just don't use utility and peek it knowing that they either won't be looking at you or won't be expecting you to dry peek. A good example of this is when playing Reyna, using your blind is just a huge announcement to your location. Sure, it can provide a lot of value in the right situations, but if I'm in a 1v1 and neither of us know where the other person is, throwing out my blind is a really great way to tell them, hey, I'm over here, come kill me. Don't get me wrong, it can be great if they end up stuck in a corner and can't avoid the blind, but in many situations, they're probably just going to avoid the blind entirely and then peek when it's over and kill you. Now we're going to cover some more niche types of peeks though, starting out with re-peeking. As you probably guessed, this is when you peek an angle, and then you peek the same angle, again, in the exact same way. Generally speaking, don't do this. Re-peeking is bad because your enemies already know your location, and they only have to aim at one place, and it's the same place that you just peeked. Similarly, you don't really know quite exactly where they are on the other side of the wall. They could be in one place or they could be in another. Re-peeking can be really good if you catch the enemies in a bad position, but just as with any of the other peeks, you'll have to use your own discretion. As a rule of thumb though, I'm telling you, peeking the same angle twice is not normally a good idea. Try to mix up your peeks. Peek from one side and then peek from another. As we mentioned earlier, throw in a jiggle, then a wide swing. Mix it up. Keep your opponents on their toes. Something we need to cover next though is probably one of the best types of peeks that you can pull off, and that is a double peek. Double peeking is quite simply when you peek with a teammate. Two of you peek the same angle in an attempt to take a 2v1. This can be really great if you think somebody is holding an angle or in a specific position. That way you and your teammate can double peek him and at the very worst trade out the kill. To do this, generally what you'll do to avoid catastrophe is have one player, generally the back one, swing wide, and then the other one will swing close. This way you'll avoid getting collateraled and give your team the best odds of coming out on top. Normally what will happen is the player you're swinging will try to track the person who is swinging wide, and it will result in them missing both targets and losing the fight. This tactic is incredibly common in higher level play and is the easiest way to assure your team's success. But lastly, let's move on to the last type of peek that we're going to talk about, which is peeking through smokes. Peeking through smokes can be really dangerous, but there are some general rules to follow when doing it. Basically, the first rule is that you should almost never peek out the front of a smoke. This is why having your smokes flush with the doorway is so important, because it gives your team the best odds of punishing players who are pushing through them. Instead, when peeking through a smoke, you want to peek through either the side of the smoke or even better, the back of the smoke. The goal here is that you want to get out of the smoke as soon as possible before the gunfight begins. By strafing out of the smoke, you hide your gun for as long as you can before taking your duel, and by exiting from the back of the smoke, you'll actually have the smoke as cover so that you can take your duel without being hindered by the smoke at all. This rule should be applied whenever you exit from any smoke in the game. That's all the peeks that we're going to cover today though. I hope this video was thorough enough for anybody looking to master the game. This is a question I feel a lot of players need answered, as they don't really know when to apply all of these things. Also, hey, if I missed anything, feel free to leave it in the comments down below, and I'll try to let you know what that peek is and how to use it. As always though, my name is King, and we here at Skill Capped want to thank you all for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.